Hello, I am here with Rajko Dodic, a city council candidate for the 2021 municipal elections. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll get started. So what do you think needs improvement in the processes of city council and administration, and how would you make these improvements?
You know, the processes or the process in place right now are that there's only three ways to get things done: is either administration driven, council driven, or citizen driven. So right now, the processes are fine. I've had experience on council before, whether it's councilor or the mayor. The problem you run into is when administration-driven initiatives are sort of rubber stamped. So as long as you inform yourself with respect to what may be administration-driven, ask the proper questions, then there'll be no problems. Of course, with the council initiatives, then of course you have to convince four people to go along with you. Citizen-driven ones are a little bit more problematic in the sense that you always want to listen to the citizens, but you have to bear in mind that sometimes what the particular group that comes before council may have an initiative that may be something that they would like to see, but not necessarily the whole city. So right now, I think generally the process is fine. It's just that you need to make sure that you keep yourself informed, ask the right questions before you move forward on anything.
Yeah, no, questions certainly help with clarification and learning more about where people stand, absolutely. What recommendations would you make to engage more citizens in the city's municipal development plan and process?
You know, that is a tough question because in the last election, less than 30% of the people actually came out to vote. I've been involved where we've had open houses for very important matters, and particularly the capital improvement program and the operating budget, which affects pretty well everyone. And you get a smattering of people actually showing up. So if we're having a difficult time getting citizens to show up for such important things as an election, and then even less people showing up to put their input into the capital improvement program and the operating budget, I have to candidly say that I have no answers as to have citizen engagement increase beyond what it is now. Because again, if they don't show up for elections, I don't know how you could make them show up for something that may not be as important as an election, but certainly impact on their lives. I mean, I tell people that council is always available. Our phone numbers are published. If we're elected, we have email address. You can have meetings and things of that nature. So basically, it's if you have an issue, contact your city council, contact all of them, and let it be known.
The options are certainly there to speak to your councilman. So people just need to take advantage of it when they have issues that they're concerned about, for sure.
Exactly.
So what do you think the top three issues are in the community, and what are you planning to do to address these issues?
Okay, well, the biggest issue, of course, is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And I gotta give credit to the city council that in terms of the masking mandate bylaw was passed well before the province had actually initiated a province-wide masking mandate. And in fact, the province had a pushback with respect to that and asked city council not to do it. But I give credit to those members of city council that supported an initiative and passed it, because that seemed a very simple way, a non-intrusive way to impact on the COVID-19 rates in Lethbridge. The second issue is public safety. And we've been hearing about the fact that the police budget has been tinkered with, and it makes it very difficult for police when they have an operating budget approved in X amount, and then all of a sudden it's been reduced by X amount and then sometimes put back in. So I would like more of a stabilized police budget so that they know that over a 4-year period or whatever time frame that is what they're going to be receiving and not getting cut back. And the third one is deferred maintenance. Everyone has seen one of it is kind of mundane, potholes, but I feel like I'm on an off-road course when I'm driving down Lethbridge. So I don't believe that the maintenance there and with respect to other infrastructure has been maintained as had been previously. Good examples of parks, green spaces. We've seen the browning of our green spaces, things of that nature. So those are just examples, but we've been deferring maintenance, and we need to make sure that we maintain the existing services we have before we build any new ones.
Yeah, I think maintenance is kind of the number one thing that most municipalities are responsible for, is certainly maintaining roads and parks and the buildings that they built and run. So that's a really astute comment there. What would you want the city to do to create a good environment for business in Lethbridge?
Businesses are not going to come to Lethbridge, especially businesses that will attract citizens to the city to work in those particular businesses. So the thing you have to make sure is, firstly, that the city is an attractive place to do business. And I don't think tax abatements and deferrals are necessarily the answer, but you need to have a situation where we make it attractive. So it's got to be attractive for kids. So you have to have green spaces, playground areas, recreational facilities, cultural facilities, and at the same time, making sure that any employer that might want to come to the city is satisfied that the city will look after the safety of the employers that either will be residents in Lethbridge or coming from out of town. So it's a bit of a sort of, just sort of pie in the sky thing, but generally just making the city a more attractive place to live in. And a large part of that is making it nice for families to be able to relocate here, or for the existing families that are here. So that's my response.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot more to business attraction than just offering tax rebates and discounts, and having a really well-rounded community plays a really big role in that, for sure. So in the most recent MDP process, what decisions did you agree with and what decisions did you disagree with?
Okay. For anyone watching this, the MDP is approaching 300 pages in length. And so I will candidly admit that I will not look at it closely. But I want to say that the MDP is a document that is required to be created by the city pursuant to the provisions of the Municipal Government Act. And so before people get too excited about what may or may not be contained in the Municipal Development Plan, I just want to read a quote from page 12 of that plan, which says, "The adoption of the MDP does not require the city to undertake any of the projects referred to herein." So basically what happens is, if a project is brought to City Council and administration says, well, this is in compliance with the MDP, and refers to the particular section and page that it's in compliance with, that doesn't mean that it will necessarily be adopted just because it's in the MDP. It's a very fluid document. So I caution people saying, don't get excited as to what you see in it. It's an overarching document, and it doesn't, as I just read to you, have to be adopted in full.
Yeah, as a living document, it certainly has the ability to guide, maybe more so than prescribe. And so that's a good point there. So when we're looking at transportation, how would you plan on prioritizing transportation in the future for Lethbridge?
It's interesting. The priorities are different in terms of, from my perspective. Transit should be number one, because if you succeed with transit, it takes care of some of the other issues with, for example, multi-occupancy automobiles and things of that nature. So that's number one to me. The second one is, second and third are multi-occupancy vehicles and vehicles. And most people would put that at the end of the list, but the reality is we live in a fairly intemperate climate, so we have snow and we have ice and we have, everything nature can throw at us. So we have to accept the reality that cars are here to stay. We're not going to have people walking downtown in minus 35-degree weather, and certainly they're not going to be driving their bicycles. So I think we have to, face that reality. Although it's a pie in the sky, thinking that you're going to increase bicycle usage and pedestrian, Lethbridge is big enough that to go from place to place, that's not going to happen. So fourth on there would be commercial vehicles, because that's how products are delivered to the various stores that we have to shop in. And fifth and sixth are pedestrians, fifth, and cycling, sixth. So the cycling folk are probably not going to like that answer, but that's not to say that I don't support bicycling initiatives. that's simply my priority based on, in large part, climatic conditions that we face in Lethbridge, and in my view, a realistic assessment of what our priority should be. Now, remember, if I get elected, I'm one member of council. I would need 4 others to agree with me before anything happens. Thank you.
Yeah, it certainly difficult in minus 35. I know I certainly don't like to bundle up and get out there and walk down the street. Maybe that's just me though. I don't really like the cold, so
I don't either.
Yeah. And I'm from Northern Alberta, so I'm used to the cold. It sometimes comes as a little bit of a shock where I go, I just like to stay inside. So where do you think the city should be spending more money?
Well, I think I mentioned not necessarily spending more money, but certainly making sure that there's adequate funding for the police, and that is to restore the existing budget that they had previously been approved for. Because when that approval came through, presumably it was based on facts that were provided to City Council at that time. So I want to make, safety is a big concern. We also, for the first time in decades, we actually borrowed money from Alberta Capital Finance to fund the completion of a project, which is a great project. So what I'm saying is there's certain things you have to borrow for infrastructure, roads, sewers, things of that nature. You can't just build 5 feet of a roadway, for example. But community projects should not require borrowing because the policy that was put in place by Mayor Carpenter back in the mid-90s, followed through by Mayor Tarlick and myself during my term between 2010 and 2013, was to not have any tax-supported debt. In fact, there was 0 tax-supported debt for community projects. Now we're in the range of $55 million. And as much as these are worthy projects, the point that Dave Carpenter was trying to make was community projects are wants versus needs, and you should only get them if you can afford to pay for them. Now, another issue is social programs. We seem to be having a lot more social programs than we had in the past, and we sort of lose sight of the fact that what we're supposed to be providing to our citizens are, like I said, mundane things like infrastructure, road, sewer, water system, transmission lines for electrical, community projects, recreational, cultural, and most importantly, public safety, fire and police services. But we tend to encroach on provincial jurisdiction where we're dealing with a lot of social issues. And the province is perfectly happy with that, because if they don't have to fund it, they look good, but the city has to funds it. And obviously it's going to at a cost to citizens. So safety, tax supported debt, social programs, and the recycling issue, that one was a problematic one for me because we had implemented the 3 recycling centers, the regional ones. So we had 85% public participation in that, even though residents only make up 25% of the recycling materials that are generated in Lethbridge. 75% are generated by commercial and industrial users. And a lot of times the tipping fees at the waste center are low enough that they just as soon dump the stuff rather than actually recycling. And I don't have the answer now, but I'd like to find out what exactly is happening to the recycled material that's actually being recycled, because I haven't got a clear knowledge on that. So I'd really like to know whether, in fact, the material is being recycled or if it's diverted into a waste facility somewhere else. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure the waste and recycling would be really happy to have that conversation. I know the conversations I've had with them, they're always really excited to talk about what they're working on and where things are going, because they're making a lot of changes over the last 5 years. So yeah, exactly. So you mentioned a lot of these in recycling and some other areas. So is there anything else where you think the city should be reducing spending?
Well, I sort of alluded to it before, the pay-as-you-go program with respect to community projects. And I give as an example the CASA Arts Center, which is a joint facility. It's used by the musical department of the University of Lethbridge, as well as for the Allied Arts Council to provide programs. Now that is a good example of where the federal government through grants and the provincial government through grants paid for the majority of the project. This was a $21 million project that was opened up in 2013. And the actual contribution from the city was $200,000. So what basically the federal government, provincial government paid for it. Over $20 million contributed to it. So what that does is the fact that you're able to access those grants means that you don't have to borrow money that the citizens have to pay back through tax-supported debt. So that's how I would save money, is just go back to the situation where we only build community projects when we can afford to do that. And also, as long as we maintain existing services, I think the citizens will be happy. They would be just as happy if we didn't build new stuff unless we absolutely needed it. I mean, some of the projects are necessary, like, for example, Fire Station Hall number 3, things of that nature, but others are more wants than needs. So that's my position.
There's certainly a struggle between municipalities who can't run debt on operating budgets and the ability for federal and provincial governments to not have that constraint. So grants and stuff are a really nice way to kind of work around that issue. So exactly. You talked about the capital improvement plan and capital projects before. What criteria do you recommend that is examined prior to approving capital projects?
The process is really quite intensive, and I assume it's the same now as it was when I was on council. So you get, it's broken down, the capital improvement program. So I'm not going to allude to infrastructure projects, because most of the capital improvement program actually deals with things like that. So there's things that's hard to, argue against, again, going back to water, sewer, that sort of stuff. Where the issue comes in is community projects. Should you be building this rec center? Should you be building that sports facility? Should you be building that cultural facility? That's where the decision of council is really important. So you get this host of 50 or so projects, and you know that in the current cycle, you can only approve 10 of them. So the process now is that the administration does a pretty good in-depth review during the finance committee's deliberation, saying which projects can be are affordable or not affordable. And then, unfortunately, City Council has to pick from a variety of very good projects and then try to decide which ones they're going to support. So a lot of it has to do with the individual sitting as council. A lot of them we will agree on. So Fire Station or Fire Hall number 3, I suspect that you'd get a vote of 9-0 to support that, because that is a necessary community project. On cultural and recreational facilities, well, then you're going to have a little bit more of a battle. So there's a priority scheme that council has to determine and do. And unfortunately, and I sympathize with them in that regard, they can't fund everything. They have to pick and choose, and they have to bring their own perspective into what they're going to approve. But the only difference that I have, and some of the councils agree with that, is just don't borrow money for community projects. That's, I don't think citizens like the fact that you have to pay interest on projects where before you had a policy in place that didn't require borrowing.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I know other councillors have mentioned as well, and weighing those needs versus wants and what that looks like. That leads us kind of into the last question that we have, which is looking at the capital improvement plan, what expenses are you in favor of, and what expenses would you not support or not be in favor of?
Well, the in favor of is quite easy, because I've already mentioned Fire Station number 3. But another one is the legacy park enhancements. When we approved the park on the north side, we had always assumed that we were going to be able to really put a lot of enhancements into it. There's been problems over the last couple of years, some that have nothing to do with the city, involved with a third-party contractor. But I was glad to see that at least funding was being put aside into the capital improvement program for that. So basically, the fire hall and the legacy park enhancement. The the ones that I'm not in favor of, and let me preface this by saying, is that I don't like to revisit things in hindsight. So if I get elected, it doesn't mean that I'm going to all of a sudden pound the table and say, look, I didn't like these projects. I wouldn't have voted on them, but I wasn't there when the council made whatever decisions they did. But the ones that I'm not particularly in favor of is the Galt number 6 mine interpretive park and the Indigenous place making strategy. Now, I don't see that really a worthwhile exercise in having administration review the names of various parks and streets and everything else to determine whether or not it's appropriate at this particular time. I mean, this is Truth and Reconciliation Week, and I support that. But we don't want to spend a lot of money revisiting issues and deciding that we want to spend money changing the names, or having people spend a lot of money looking into whether or not names should be changed for various facilities. So those aren't huge items, but they're just examples of things that I wouldn't have supported. But again, I hasten to add is that I'm not in the interested in revisiting issues. I'm interested in moving forward and making the best decisions I can as we move forward.
Absolutely. And I know that there's, I'm sure, a lot of Indigenous groups that will be looking at those sort of things. And that's something that they are very passionate about and are the kind of authority to speak on those sort of things as well. So that's another perspective there. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. Is there anything you'd like to add or let people know how they can get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me by contacting me at my email address. It's rajkododic@gmail.com. It's RAJKODODIC@gmail.com. And the final thought I want to leave you with is thank you for the interview. It's always interesting to have sort of a one-on-one discussion on issues, but I want people to understand that what I've brought to council before was ensuring that I inform myself of whatever issues are before council, asking the questions that were appropriate, and then making decisions that I think would benefit the majority of the citizens of Lethbridge to the best of my ability.
Yeah, and certainly having informed decision makers is always important. So I can definitely appreciate that. So thank you so much, Rajko. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks.